Hello everyone! Today I have a Forge Guard build for you guys. Forge Guard recently got reworked, so I wanted to try it out. Specifically, I got interested in the skill Forge Strike. It has a line of text on it that says, added damage is applied at 500% effectiveness. So I was super excited. After playing the build, I think that, the general consensus is true, that the skill tree and passive tree revamp that Forge Guard got was really good, but it still needs some love. So let's get into it. Alright, let's get into the playstyle of the build. So, in monos, you're going to use Forge Strike against rare enemies in small packs, and then eventually just interweaving Vengeance and Rive to regen mana, right? But against bosses, the combo is going to be using Volatile Reversal at the start, as well as Abyssal Echoes in order to give yourself attack speed and debuff the enemies to take 50% more damage, and then you're going to spam all your Forge Strikes out. Then, once you're out of mana, you're going to use Rive to get your mana back. Additionally, we use Lunge, unspec'd, to dash around. What that means for us is that we don't have any specialized movement skill, right? We don't run Void Cleave or anything like that, because that requires a little bit of investment. Also, we don't have good traversal skills as a Sentinel, like Mage or Acolyte. They have Teleport and Transmite, which are a lot better alternatives, so you want to build move speed on your gear. Let's move on to the skills. So we are going to do a deep dive onto Forge Strike, right? It's the crux of the build. If you're interested in the rest of the build, I'd recommend looking into like Rive builds that are related to Void Knight, because those might be more interesting to you. But here's how it goes. Forge Strike has the line of text on it. Added damage effectiveness applies at 500%. So that's got me curious. With a lot of investment, how far can this skill go? So Forge Strike has two problems, right? The first is base damage. It comes with 2 base damage, and the second is mana. So as a 2 base damage skill, how can we add melee damage to make it strong? First, in the skill tree, we can find that there is a node called Temper, which gives 4 fire damage per point, adding up to a max of 20 base fire damage. So that's pretty good, but there's nothing else in the skill tree. So let's move on to looking at the passive tree. In the Forge Guard passive tree, there's a node called Fresh from the Forge. It gives 1 melee damage per point, and we put 5 in initially, and then up to 10 for 10 fire damage and 10 physical damage total. So that's an additional 20 melee damage, which is good, but we still want more. So we look outside of the Forge Guard tree, because there's no more base damage in the Forge Guard tree, to Void Knight. Void Knight has a node called Temporal Corruption. It gives 2 void damage per point. We're going to put 2 points in it to get 4 melee void damage. And then there's a node that branches off from it called Void Blades that gives 3 melee void damage per point. So it's more effective than Temporal Corruption. And we're going to put all 8 points in there to get 24 points of melee void damage. So that's an additional 28 points of melee damage that we're adding to the skill. Pretty good. But let's go to items, right? That's the best way to get melee damage. From our items, we're running Black Blade of Chaos, the BBC. I see what you did there, Yichi. It gives us 70 flex melee damage. That is 35 fire and 35 physical for us, because Forge Strike is a fire physical skill. It also comes with 24 to 56 melee lightning damage and 24 to 56 melee void damage. Specifically, I think I have 37 and 47 lightning and void damage on mine, which is really good as far as added base damage goes, right? We're also getting 10 melee void damage from Shattered Chains, and then 24 melee melee fire damage from Falcon Fist. So to go over our base damage spread, because it's now distributed, we have 40 physical damage, 84 fire damage, 40 lightning damage, and 72 void damage. That gives us a grand total of 240 base damage, which is really good. But if you look at the added damage effectiveness, that's 1,200 base damage. Really good stuff. Now we have a new problem, of course, which is that we've scaled 4 different types of damage. So how do we handle that? We need to run multipliers that affect all 4 damage types at the same time. 1 point of strength for us, looking at stats, gives us 0.5% crit multi, 0.2% fire pen, 0.2% physical pen, and 4% increased damage, as well as 4% increased armor. So it's good, just not as good as Sorcerer, where it takes 1 point of intelligence and it gives it spell crit strike chance, as well as like damage and ward retention, right? So intelligence does more for sorcerer than it does for us. It still gives us crit multi, fire pen, and fizz pen, which is more stuff across the board, but it's not as generic. Crit multi, of course, is generic, but the values aren't that much. So looking at other methods of scaling all our damage, the base damage tree for Forward Strike comes with 13% base crit strike chance and 100% bonus crit strike multi. So we want to run crit. Crit will scale all our damage, right? So we're going to be a crit build. We're going to get crit from a lot of different sources. But how can we scale our damage other than crit, right? We have a node in Paladin called Conviction that gives us physical, fire, and lightning damage along with their pens. So that's most of our damage except for Void. Otherwise, we are running the node Void Corruption in the Void Knight tree that gives us 1% crit strike multi per point in Void Knight. We're already invested there for our base damage, so it's a free like 20 to 30% for us based on where we are. And lastly, we can scale via our items, right? Titan Heart gives us 30 to 40% more melee damage. I have 38, which applies to all our damage types. Shatter Chains gives us 5% more damage per stack of Doom and 50 to 60% more melee damage, which both apply to all damage types. Huge. Anchor of Oblivion gives us 90% more void damage, and our BBC gives us Lightning Pen and Void Pen per point in dexterity. So we want to also kind of scale dexterity. Siphon of Anguish gives us Void Pen, and it also helps us apply Doom, and Decayed Skull gives us 80% more void damage. So all in all, a lot of really good ways to scale our damage. We're not really focusing on any individual type of damage type that much. We're doing a lot of crit multi and more melee damage to scale all our damage together. I also want to go over a node in the Forward Strike tree called Detonating Grounds, which is a secondary hit that applies after the first hit. It has added damage effectiveness of 200%, so still really good. It also has a 160% more multiplier with another node inside the Forward Strike tree. So while it doesn't have the same crit strike chance, it is potentially a lot of added damage, right? Just adding that in there before we move on. We talked about fixing the damage problem with Forward Strike. Now let's talk about the mana. So because of the node Time and Faith, we can either use Rive, Vengeance, or Multi-Strike to generate mana. I'm going to talk about Rive and Multi-Strike because those are the skills that we used in our build. I used Rive until like 450 Corruption, and then I transitioned over to Vengeance. Rive definitely felt better, but Vengeance makes me tankier. So let's talk about Rive. What was interesting about it? If you are playing this in the early game, you're going to probably take Rive. It has 100 base added damage effectiveness for the first 2 strikes and 2 base damage, but it has this node called Foe Cleaver, which adds the effect of damage stats on your two-handed weapon again, so at another 100% effectiveness. It also has this node called Scrap Metal that gives you a buff that transforms forged weapons into scrap metal. It gives you 3% more damage for Rive as well as 3% more armor, so it's just generically a good buff. Otherwise, we would be taking the crit strike chance path and skipping the 3rd strike for more attack speed. However, we are running Vengeance. Vengeance says that if Vengeance successfully hits an enemy and you take a hit in the next 2 seconds, you will riposte, taking 25% less damage. So the less damage taken is huge. We take the node Double Riposte to have more hits that we can take. Then we take Dark Duelist for more global damage, pretty big, and then we get another riposte. So we're taking a lot less damage, 18% less damage. We're taking Rapid Strikes for attack speed, going into Executioner just so we can get to Bolster. So we have 5% less damage taken and 10% more armor if you've used Vengeance in the last 2 seconds. Scaling that with 5 points to get up to 25% less damage taken and 50% increased armor. So it's a very defensive ability, right? Otherwise, we go further left to Smelter's Vengeance and Molten Riposte to get some armor penetration and fire penetration, as well as Essence of Revenge to get that increased void damage and increased melee damage, which is generically useful for us. It's 15% per point. We're going to put 2 points in there for 30% per point. Just a nice little damage buff. All right, so we talked about our mana generator and our mana spender. We talked about how we're getting a bunch of damage and defense. Let's talk about all the auxiliary abilities now. So we are running Healing Hands, which is just generically a good skill to run with any melee sentinel. The node Cleric's Hammer makes it apply on any melee hit. Then we're going to take Searing Light to turn it into a hit, It gives us added spell damage applied at 200% effectiveness. Remember, that's spell damage, so we need to take Seraph Blade to convert it to a melee attack, now granting effects on the tree that granted spell damage, now grant melee damage instead. So this is an interesting node because it doesn't say at what effectiveness it's at. It said before for Searing Light that it had 200% added effectiveness, so I'm assuming that's 200% here as well. If that's the case, very good skill for us. Otherwise, we're going into Bane of Evil and then Halted Scourge and Turn Undead in order to do more damage to Necrotic and Void, which encompasses most of the enemies in the game. Importantly, we're taking Purity of Thought to reduce our mana, as well as 3 points in Blessed Parage to reduce our mana again. It turns into a 0 mana skill with that, so free damage. Next, let's talk about Sigils of Hope and Abyssal Echoes. So the reason we're talking about both of them is because you want to initially run Sigils of Hope when you're leveling. Putting points into the Paladin tree is a little bit better effectiveness for leveling because you get that like elemental resistance, and Healing Hands is pretty easy to automate with the Orion Sunseal ring. So let's talk about Sigils of Hope first. Sigils of Hope gives us damage granted per active sigil at 25%. We run 3 to 4 sigils, so that's up to 75 to 100% added damage. It gives us 3 base fire damage, which we are converting to Void with the node Sigils of Despair. It also gives us 15% increased Void damage per active sigil, 3 to 4, so that's 45 to 60% added damage there. Otherwise, it gives us global melee damage after we use the sigil because it's automated. It happens pretty quickly, every 10 seconds, I believe. So every 10 seconds, we get 3 seconds of 150% global melee damage. So good stuff. Otherwise, we go to Tetragram just to get a maximum sigil, and we're taking the duration from Enduring Hope. So sigils, pretty easy to use, pretty good automation. I would run it until you start getting to the point where you need more boss damage. I think maybe like 300 to 500 corruption is a good place to swap over from sigils to Abyssal Echoes. So the benefit of taking Abyssal Echoes, first off, is that you don't have to put points in the Paladin skill tree. While there are useful nodes, putting points inside the Void Knight skill tree helps you get more crit multi and more base damage. So Abyssal Echoes has that going for it. It also has the node Embracing Darkness, which says damage versus blind with buff, 5% per point, which is 20% total, as well as attack speed with buff, which is 20% total. So attack speed steroid and damage steroid, really good stuff. It gives you blind, it gives you physical shred, which is more damage for you, even though physical shred is only like 1/4 of your damage, right? It also gives you armor shred stacks, so very good overall node for more damage. I've transitioned into it after I got to like 400 corruption because I needed more damage. That also freed up my ring slot to go for a different ring, so I dropped Orion Sunseal for Phantom Grips. All right, lastly, let's talk about Volatile Reversal. This is a required skill for the build. You're taking this because of the node Harbinger of Dust, which makes you do 30% increased damage on hit. So very important for all hit-based builds or damage over time builds. If you're taking damage over time, you take Time Rifts. Basically, you just want to take, for our build, you want to take Harbinger of Dust and then take the 2 Void Rifts. Then you want to spec into Warp Time to get the global attack speed and catching up for the global move speed. And then you can take the 2 cooldown nodes. Those are fine as well. So all you need is 20 points in this. You don't need to worry about scaling it. Very cheap. Every Sentinel's running this. While it sucks to run sometimes, if you really hate it, you shouldn't be playing Sentinel. That's all there is to it. All right, let's talk about items. So we are running the Black Blade of Chaos, which is, we've talked about it a lot already, but it's an Odachi, so it gives us melee crit strike multi, which is huge. But as a result, we need to run melee crit strike chance as an implicit. So it's going to take some farming to get that. Otherwise, it has lightning penetration per dexterity and void penetration per dexterity, so there's a reason to get some dexterity in our build as well. What that means for us is that we're not running a spear. I think he was running a spear. You get from Weapons Master, you get 5% base crit strike chance from a spear. If you were running that, spears also often have base crit strike chance on their implicit, so you could run an Exalted Spear or a Unique Spear and have maybe a better time, maybe a different time, but definitely less added damage on it. So that's all I want to say about that. You can follow his build if you're going to run a spear. If you're going to try to run a black blade like me, I think this path is very different. Otherwise, let's talk about other items. Titanheart is pivotal to our build because we're using a two-handed weapon, so we get the less damage taken. Getting a 2 LP is important. Mine has a pretty bad strength roll and health roll, but if you get a 2 LP like I did, try to get like tier 6 or tier 7 increased health on there, as well as some strength. I missed on my tier 7 flat health, so that's why I have what I have, but it's still decent. I have 30% increased melee damage and increased health. Both of those scale up to 40%. Very good ability. Or sorry, very good item. Shattered Chains is a must for a melee build. We've gone over all the benefits. Increased armor, melee void damage, increased melee damage with Doom. As a result, we also need to run a Siphon of Anguish. Easy to get LP with that. It gives us move speed, leech, and a chance to apply Doom, as well as Void Pen, so a good offensive ring. Easy to get with 2 LP. Otherwise, if you don't want to run Siphon of Anguish, or you just want more Doom chance, you can run Stymied Fate, which is a pair of boots. I'll get into the boots later though, because there's a lot to go over with boots. If you're running Sigils, run Orion's Sunseal. If you're not, I would run Phantom Grips. I'm running Phantom Grips. I have some resists on here, but basically you want the +2 to melee skills because Forge Strike is a melee skill, and the crit strike chance is nice for your healing hands and your detonating grounds, both of which don't have base crit strike chance on the tree. Otherwise, we are running Decayed Skull because it's an incredible item, easy to get with LP, increases void damage, increases armor, and has the line of text that's so important that says, armor mitigation applies to damage over time, right? Absolutely incredible line of text. I am also running a Nihilus, but you can definitely swap it. I'm running it because it has increased health and mana and level to all skills. I have Ellie Res on there. It has, I think I have minus like 5% more armor, so that's whatever, but I have a bunch of resists, so it's a generically good amulet. If you don't, you should definitely run an Exalted Amulet with Crit Strike multi on there. You can probably get Armor Shred as well and some other important affixes. It's definitely not required for this build. I'm running Anchor of Oblivion because I wanted to max my endurance. It's a really good way to increase damage. I have Crit Strike multi on there. Low roll, but still pretty good. Void damage is there, which is decent, but the endurance and the strength are pretty much why we're running it, as well as the increased armor. Falcon Fist, we've already talked about it a little bit, but it has tier 7 melee attack speed, which is huge, and melee fire damage, which is also pretty big. I have a 2 LP with strength on there that I'm not running because I decided I wanted more Doom chance. So I'm running attack speed. 13% is fine, but I would definitely recommend getting like attack speed and hybrid health if you can manage it. The other lines of text are useful for rogues, but we don't care about it. So, the big boot discussion. Boots, there's so many options. Basically, if you have the chance, you really want to run hybrid health here. I was farming Blood of the Exile, so I had a pretty good Blood of the Exile with tier 6 hybrid health. That's a really good way to go. It gives increased movement speed. I would also recommend getting move speed on your boots. If you look right now, I'm running Foot of the Mountain. I have a 3 LP, I have tier 7 attunement and tier 6 strength on there, and both of those scale my Forward Strike, which is why I'm running it. I think if you ever want to fight Abroth or some of the bosses, you really want the move speed and hybrid health though. My survivability is just fine for like 600 corruption, which is where I'm at right now. So I'm still okay with these boots, but definitely prioritize hybrid health and move speed. There are a lot of other options though, other than Blood of the Exile or Foot of the Mountain. Those just give stats, but there are things like Soul Run Step, which if you have a ton of physical resistance, you can run. It gives you melee crit strike, or sorry, melee crit multi at 105%. So it's a really big damage bonus. You can also run Stymied Fate, which gives Doom on hit and haste. So if you run those two, I would definitely recommend getting like hybrid health and maybe strength on there just for some stats. Otherwise, if you could find a way to run Void Cleave, or maybe you just want to run it, you can run Dark Stride, which gives move speed based off of added melee void damage, which we're running a decent amount of, so it should give some move speed. Okay, those were items. Now let's move on to passives. So I'm going to approach this from the angle that you're leveling, and then I'm going to talk about some of the flexibilities that we need to make in the later part of the game. So Sentinel, just take the strength and fire resist and void resist, take a little bit of vitality, and go into armor clad to get that damage taken from nearby enemies reduction. And then we want time and faith. We talked about it, it's our mana generator, super important. We don't want to go for Blade Master, which would give us sword attack and cast speed. It would be big, but it requires 10 points of investment, so we're not going to do it. When you're leveling, put 15 points in Healing Hands, go 8 points of Conviction, 8 points of Defiance, and then a couple points elsewhere just to get, or actually 8 points of both should get you to Sigils of Hope value. So just good stats all across the board for leveling. Then put 5 points into Void Knight, right? That'll give you like just a little bit of Temporal Corruption and Abyssal Endurance. With those, you should have access to Volatile Reversal, Healing Hands, and Sigils of Hope, which is all your leveling abilities. From that point, put 5 points into Weapons Masters to get the increased melee attack speed with swords. Put 5 points into Fresh from the Forge, just so you can get the Fizz Pen and Fire Pen for Forge Strike. And then put like a couple points into Battle Hardened and Unflinching or Guardian, just to get some additional tankiness when you're leveling. After that, you're going to go into Champion of the Forward for increased crit strike chance with two-handed weapons and crit strike multi per strength. So very important for our build. After that, you want to go into Crushing Blows for more damage, because it'll give us 15% more damage. Or if you really want to, you can go into Iron Attunement. That's not bad if you have a lot of attunement. It can give you damage over time reduction, but we have it elsewhere, so I'm not too worried about it. Then you want to put 6 points into Might and 5 points into Iron Reflexes, because we're taking Might for the strength and increased health, very required for our build. And then we're taking Iron Reflexes because we want to scale dexterity a little bit, and the dodge rating to armor is pretty helpful in the early parts of the game. We are then taking Duelist for more crit strike chance. You can put 5 points in here initially, and then you're going to put 4 points into Lethal Strikes. That should give you the Fire Pen per strength and Physical Pen per strength, and the freedom to go into Master of Arms. We want to put 8 points into here to get strength with two-handed weapons. So at this point, once we've gone this far and once we've gotten to Empower Monos, I think maybe like 150 to 300 Corruption, you want to do a swap eventually from Sigils to Void Knight's Abyssal Echoes. At that point, just keep Conviction, get the LE res from your items, and then put points into Void Blades and Sorrow and Steel. Just max those out and get points into Finality. You want to get melee kill threshold. The void damage is nice, but the kill threshold is the most important part. So that's our goal with the Void Knight tree. After that, you can max out Fresh from the Forge and maybe move points here and there. You can drop Iron Reflexes if you want and put points into Avatar of War for more increased damage. So that's what I would recommend for passives. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. This was a long video to make, partially because the build took a while, partially because I've tried to step up the editing a little bit. I'm not the best editor yet, but if you guys like this kind of content, please drop a sub, leave a comment. I'm mainly doing this to interact with everyone because it's super fun to do these builds. I want to see what you guys are building as well. Y'all have a good time. Have some good builds going now that the event's over. I know more people are going to phase out of Last Epoch before the next cycle starts. So if you're watching this in the new cycle, hopefully things have changed. Y'all have a good time. See ya.